Thank you to those of you who take time out of your day, specifically your early morning, to join me for these day texts. I think it's a good thing to do if you have the time, either as we do them or later if you watch the videos, because then you can progressively work through this material with us, review it, consider different opinions, think about how you understand it, and then look up other things on your own so that we can collectively promote a better understanding of these ancient histories and texts. And specifically, where we're concerned, promoting the belief in the god Jah. Not to hurt people, not because we want to enslave them in a system that's going to take advantage of them. No, we promote the god Jah because he's the one, historically, who not only created us, but who has been there trying to assist us in our condition that we chose for ourselves, as we're going to read in these day texts, not specifically today, but we're getting close to it. And in terms of the context of the Garden of Eden, things that happened that we believe set into motion a different path for humans to walk that we chose and that we've been making and that Jah's been helping us get through all the way to this point. But the beliefs presented in the Bible about the god Jah are by no means unique to the biblical texts. And I'm going to share just a couple other ancient beliefs about similar things that I'd be interested to hear how you think about in terms of their comparison with what we've read to this point and with what we're going to read today. So to set that up, well, we're going to be reading Genesis chapter 3, and we're going to be reading verses 1 through 7. And part of that account, as you're going to see, it's going to involve a certain type of creature in addition to the humans. So we've gone through these days of creation. We're now at the point where the creatures of the earth have been made. Humans have been made. Male and female, they have been made. And now, one of the creatures, seemingly, approaches one of the humans. And the creature is described in ways like we would describe a snake or a serpent. That is as hissing, or another way that you could understand the Hebrew term used in Genesis to describe the creature that approaches Eve is the whispering creature. The low talking creature who very, what's the right word? Subtly, right? Wisely, even cleverly. What did Jesus say? Wise as serpents, innocent as doves. So Jesus said that. Jesus described the serpent's quality as wise, as aware, as not being fooled very easily. And obviously a serpent can get very close to you and is not a loud creature, right? Serpents are not loud. Some may, they do cause a hissing sound or a warning sound. Rattlers have a sound, but they don't verbalize or grunt or create the kinds of sounds or roar. So, why does the Bible, as we're going to read, describe the creature that approaches Eve as a whispering creature, as a hissing creature? Is it a real snake? Well, let's take a look at some of the different beliefs that humans have had about serpents or snakes that seem like they're more than just that kind of belief in a low-level creature. Let's take a look at this article from Ancient Origins, November 27th, 2017. Carl Kalman, The Myth of the Plumed Serpent. I'll put this link in the description below, revealing the real message behind the feathered snake. And of course, when it comes to dating ancient cultures like the Aztecs or the Mayans, They can go to a certain extent. But then there are pre-Mayan cultures even that they refer to as the Olmecs, which appear to me to be the first or one of the first groups of people after the flood that went back to South America and reestablished civilization, just like the Genesis account says, after the Tower of Babel. And then that's why we have these different cultures after the Olmecs, the Mayans, the Aztecs. There are ancient ruins even below these ancient ruins that are a part of what are considered the Olmec civilization. And the group that are referred to as the Olmecs, that I believe are part of the first group that came back to South America after the flood, probably did so because that part of the earth was inhabited before the flood. And they knew where to go. And that's why we have places like Pumapunku, Chichen Itza, Tiwanaku, Lake Titicaca. All of these South American incredible civilizations, the Nazca lines. Who was doing all this? Who built Pumapunku, which has these gigantic, perfectly measured and carved out blocks that look like they fit together at one time into something and then were totally destroyed, ripped apart? Something like a global flood would do. Destroyed all of those things or sunk them below the waters if they were carved out of solid rock like the Yanaguni Monument. So what about this serpent? What about these ancient cultures? Why a serpent? So we'll get to some of this perhaps, or you can read it on your own, but you can even see here that the design of this pyramid, the pyramid of the plumed serpent at Chichen Itza, this you see this little stairway shadow? Many of you may know this, but this actually, during times of the day, moves like a real serpent would go. They put a lot of thought and effort into a structure for a serpent, plumed or feathered serpent. They sculpted serpents like you see here at the base of the stairways of El Castillo. Let's read this section briefly here about the Mayan civilization and potentially the pre-Mayan civilization, post or even pre-flood, and their belief about this serpent. It says this raises, the pyramid, these sculptures, all this effort built into this structure for a serpent. This raises the question why the Maya about 1,000 years ago built a pyramid. In fact, their most impressive pyramid. And the dating, again, some of the dating may or may not be accurate, just like with some of the Egyptian pyramids and things. Either way, it says, why would they build this pyramid with the purpose of worshiping a serpent? It does not quite make sense to modern people who tend to look upon a snake as a low-level reptile, which does not seem worthy of any form of religious worship. For this reason, we have tended to dismiss the plumed serpent as a myth that lacked basis in reality and was made up by an ignorant people. That's what your traditional archaeologists and people who look down on early humanity and human civilizations, and of course religion, since that was so much a part of every ancient culture, we're not taught about these things in their proper context. And yet the plumed serpent was the central deity in ancient Mexico. Not only that, in the Popol Vuh, which is sometimes called the Bible of the Maya, the plumed serpent was seen as the central creator god, the one that the other gods went to when the creation of this universe was to begin. According to the Mayan lore, we also know that the plumed serpent was, among other roles, was regarded as the bringer of civilization and the calendar. And so, in the terms of the creation and the civilization, they're going way back and attributing it to this serpent that other gods would consult. In their view, when the plumed serpent disappeared, their civilization would suffer, but as he returned, they would go through a rebirth and flourish. And you can read more about the different beliefs and traditions preserved by the Mayan, as well as Olmec culture, later on in this article if you want to read it on your own. But we're going to consider this part here, and then we're going to go to the day text material. But I want you to understand some context going into the reading so that you can see that this idea of a serpent hissing or whispering to people was not unique. Global serpent mythology. Before we go into what the plumed serpent actually may have symbolized, we should take note of the fact that the serpent played a very significant role, mythological role, quote unquote, in many other ancient cultures as well. The mythological, of course, depending on whether it was real or not. But we're talking about the role it played in these ancient cultures, nonetheless. What, for instance, may be the oldest preserved object of art is a giant python in current-day Botswana that has been estimated to be 70,000 years old. And the dates they assign to these things are often not correct and are based on surrounding sediment that they date and then attribute to the artifact. So you can look more about the dating of that artifact on your own, and we can also discuss it separately. But we're going to just accept it as part of this article because we're reading it not for the age of the artifact, because it doesn't provide supporting data for that, but for the ancient beliefs associated with the artifact. This is believed to symbolize a creator god revered by the ancestors of today's Bushmen. Similarly, to the Aborigines in Australia, the rainbow serpent was the main creator god, and in the Amazons, the great anaconda was seen as the creator of human beings. In fact, now we're nowhere near where we believe Eden is, or was. We're nowhere near the biblical events that took place and that are recorded for us in the land of the Middle East and Israel and all the surrounding countries and regions. We're on a completely different continent. Sorry, Dada was driving me nuts. He was scratching one of my papers, and I had to stop him. So my apologies for that. The rainbow serpent was the main creator god, and in the Amazonas, the great anaconda was seen as the creator of human beings. In fact, all over the world, including in the book of Genesis of the Bible, we find the serpent revered as an especially powerful animal. This does not match what a modern person would think of a snake, and it makes us wonder why the serpent played such a significant role in ancient myths. All right, let's go ahead and take that with us now into our day text reading. And so let's take a look. I'm going to go ahead and pull up our day text reading. You can follow along by reading the text in the description below or according to your own copy of the Bible. Keep in mind what we just read about the ancient global beliefs about the power of the serpent and all the things that we just briefly read about in the South American cultures. Now we're going all the way over to Israel, the Middle East, Africa, Asia, and the surrounding areas. These are the ancient traditions carried by Moses and the Hebrews that he freed from Egypt. Moses being raised in Egypt, being learned in all the wisdom of Egypt, just like Acts says. Egypt being the place below Sumer, above which is Anatolia, where Mount Ararat exists, and where the ark landed and where people migrated from down into Sumer, down into Egypt, and brought all these beliefs and ideas and or myths that relate back to the pre-flood days, and some of which to the post-flood days, like with Nimrod and different individuals who set themselves up along with their descendants. So, but when it comes to the serpent, these myths go all the way back to the creation days and to other times. So, in fact, let me share with you one other section. We'll just read this one section right here that shows other different similarities. Let's take a look here real briefly. This is another article, also from Ancient Origins, The Maya Myth of Creation by April Holloway, January 30th, 2013. I'll put a link below. Let's just read these paragraphs. So combined with what we just read about the different ancient South American civilizations, here notes the Mayan civilization flourished in South America at approximately 2000 BC. So again, you have some people believing that some of these pyramids were built 1,000 years ago, and you have other people putting the Mayan civilization back 4,000 years ago, which I believe is probably accurate and certainly consistent with the building of pyramids around the earth at that time, and or in association with the pre-Mayan culture, such as the Olmecs. So they developed a unique style of arts and architecture, astronomy, and even a written language. We all know, right, how impressive and accurate the Mayan calendar is, the Mayan language. We can see the pyramids, just like Egypt. These people were not dumb. There's no evidence ancient civilizations were these primitive Australopithecine type creatures just barely figuring out how to talk and walk and and write. No, none of that is consistent with what we can actually show existed. Through their writing and even the famous Mayan calendar, though their writing and even the famous Mayan calendar were not their own invention, but from the Olmecs, they developed them further. Popol Vuh, or Book of the People, is a collection of narratives containing the myths and historical facts of the Maya, and is based on the manuscript of the Dominican priest Francisco Jimenez. Unfortunately, most of their literature and writings were destroyed during the invasion by the Spanish in the 18th century, making the Popol Vuh a valuable piece of work. It is important to clarify here that the word myth does not exist in Mayan. See, so that's why when they refer to them as myths, you often will get this kind of verbal coloring in these different languages. See right here, containing the myths. These different crazy little ads right here. So you can get people referring to them as a collection of myths, but that's not really trying to get that word myth, but it's associated there. And even though the word myth doesn't exist in the very language that they're referring to as collecting these as a collection of narratives, being myths. So they don't have that word, yet the word's used for their writings. Okay, so people believe those writings are myths. Yet, according to the Popol Vuh, it contains their history. Well, what is their history? We read part of it regarding the plumed serpent. In this book, the creation myth plays a prominent role. The gods first created the earth and the sky, then continued with the animals and living creatures, as well as the birds and other flying life forms. The gods wanted to be invoked, worshipped, and remembered, but the animals were unable to talk. Thus, the gods failed with their first effort. And so this is where it gets more into the extended Mayan beliefs associated with these early gods and these different creation days. But you note, before we got to the part about them making humans because of the communication issue, although Jah does says, let's make humans like us, so that would naturally involve their type of communication, which is why the hissing creature is so interesting. We'll get to it in a moment. But otherwise, look at how similar it is. Creation myth is almost identical, right? First create the earth and the sky, then the animals, living creatures, birds, other flying life forms, then humans. So these early, and this is just one. I'm not going to get off into all the different creation accounts. There are many. I encourage you to look them up, especially the Mesopotamian ones, to the extent that we can credibly understand them. There's still a lot more work to be done there. But there is a great degree of consistency with things like creation, the flood, and the whispering creature, the serpent. So let's get to it. Here's our day text reading. Let me just cover us good right there. So we have a lot of the text. and we can read it well together. There we go. Okay, so with that context in mind, both global and specific in terms of what I described as far as the post-flood world, pre-flood world, the migration from Anatolia to Sumer to Egypt, Moses, and all these descriptions, right? Even Egypt, the Pharaoh's crown, what does it prominently show? A serpent. They're everywhere. The main feature piece of the Pharaoh's crown was a serpent, showing where his power derived. Genesis chapter 3, verse 1. Hebrew translation. Excuse me. The whispering or hissing creature had become thoughtful because of the community belonging to the land which Jaho God had made. So the whispering creature started saying to the woman, "Has God said you are not to eat from all trees belonging to the exclusive garden?" Now remember, I translated this section before I translated the prior sections we just considered, or some of them. And so where I'm translating enclosed garden, it's basically the same as the special place. And at some point I'll make the translation more consistent when I go back through it. This is just my draft, really, of Genesis that I believe is credible, but they will have these differences more now than they will later once I edit it into a published version. But it's nonetheless accurate. It represents the right sense of the term. It's just a little different from some of my newer translations of Genesis 2. Has God said you are not to eat from all trees belonging to the special place or exclusive garden? That's the end of verse 1, Hebrew translation. Let's compare that with verse 1 of the Greek text. The ancient Greek translation that the Jews completed and carried with them, and that the Christians also continued as part of their collection of scripture texts, for the most part. Verse 1, Greek translation, on the other hand, that is in comparison to all these other things written before, the hissing creature was the most thoughtful of all the wild animals among those which Lord Jaho God had made. So the hissing creature said to the woman, "What did God say? You too should not eat from every tree belonging to the enclosed garden or special place?" Verse 2, Hebrew translation, then the woman replied to the whispering creature, "We can eat from fruit belonging to all of the trees of the enclosed garden." Verse 2, Greek translation, the woman replied to the hissing creature, "We will eat from fruit of a tree belonging to the enclosed garden." Verse 3, Hebrew translation, the woman continues her reply to the hissing creature or whispering creature. "But from the fruit belonging to the tree which is in the middle of the enclosed garden, God has said, you are not to eat from it and you are not to reach for it. Otherwise, you will die." Verse 3, Greek translation, "But from the fruit belonging to the tree." This is Eve responding to the hissing or whispering creature. "But from the fruit belonging to the tree which is in the middle of the enclosed garden or special place, God said, you will not eat from it, neither should you take hold of it, so you may not die." Okay, let's stop here for a moment because you notice it describes the whispering creature as distinct from the community of people, or creatures, I should say, things, everything, of the land that Jaho God had made. So, what are we to understand from that? Well, all we can really say is that there is a creature that is serpent-like, that is talking to the woman whom God had made. So whatever it was about the serpent, is what made it talk to the woman. Now, let me stop there for a moment and explain a little bit further. So we know in our ancient world, based on fossil evidence, we had a number of different types of creatures, most of which we don't have today. Some of them, right? We have crocodiles, even ancient giant serpents existed. But there were a lot of other things, a lot of other reptiles and creatures, not just snakes. In fact, the earth at that time appears to have been dominated by these reptilian, serpent-like creatures we call the dinosaurs. We have this description in Eden of a serpent-like creature uniquely described in ways that seem to fit more with the community of creatures we know once existed. Right? If the whispering creature, the hissing creature, is a snake-like reptilian creature, well, what were the creatures that dominated the entire earth in terms of size and deadliness, up into and maybe even including the time of man? Why we may have been told to avoid certain things, to not go here or there. We know the oceans contain things that would have killed even Adam and Eve. So it's not like just being human beings, being perfectly made without sin. That's what perfect means, right? You're not making bad choices that bring forth death, because that's the condition John made to result from choices that are incorrect. That's how he preserves existence the right way and doesn't allow the wrong thing to take root, dies. Or it's managed and judged like his other serpent sons, like right here. Eventually, everything is contained within what Jah has made. So within what Jah has made, in the community of creatures belonging to the land, a serpent creature speaks to Eve and asks her something it seems like he already knows. I say he, I'm using a pronoun we use, it, whatever. We know that we later on identify the serpent as Satan, but I'll get to that. So that's how we typically refer to this creature. But the hissing creature, the whispering creature, comes to Eve and asks the very question that specifically relates to the thing they're not supposed to do, right? It's not like the whispering creature came, it's really thoughtful. This whole most thoughtful, that clearly then ties to the question resulting from the thought. It wasn't a question like, so what is it that God wants you to do with the garden? How is Adam, have you learned how to work with a man? If so, whether or not the serpent creature, the whispering creature could have helped or not. In our view, having been there during the creation, obviously he would have known what Adam was for. Either way, my point is I'm getting to the question. The question, the one question, the only question. The whispering creature speaks. Well, I guess you could say two if you look at the Greek, right? Because it says, what did God say? You should not eat from every tree. So I don't mean to limit it just to one, but basically it's one question, right? Did God say this? It's the question you ask in a way that you already know the answer, but that you're sort of like, you're wanting the person to think about, right? You know the answer. They know the answer. They're doing it. Right? And she knew it. She responded of what was correct. So he knew she knew that. He knew that. It's the one question he asks. The most thoughtful creature. And all he chooses to ask about is whether or not God said you should eat from this thing or not. Right? Because nothing else was described in that way. There was no other prohibition. There was no other command against the man. The serpent, the whispering creature, could not have said, well, in terms of something bad, he couldn't have picked anything else. And that's why the tree of the knowledge of good and bad is so perfect. Because it was Jah's way of teaching humans good and bad without us ever having to choose it. Now, we can choose bad, and we did. Jesus did not. That's the difference in our view. And look at him. Look at us. We made the wrong choice. We always do. That's how we're made right now. Either way, back to this question here. So the whispering creature, he focuses on the one thing that has a negative command. Don't do it. Everything else, go do it. It's made for you. And then do these things too. Don't do this, though. The whispering creature thinks about all this stuff and realizes that's the one thing he wants to ask about. What did Jesus say about the devil? That one was a manslayer from the beginning. The one question he thought about. The whispering creature knew the one thing he could use to create enmity between God and man and woman and create an issue rather than just listen to what Jah said. So, the whispering creature thought about it, realized there was only one question that could be asked that could trigger this kind of sequence of events that might make the woman rethink her position and do what he says. So we're going to read about what he says. But now we know that the woman knows what is not to be done, right? She repeated it. You're not to reach for it. You're not to eat it, or you'll die. It's not like God, Jaho, gave him a command and didn't tell him why. It's not like, you see that really beautiful tree over there in the middle of the special place? Don't eat from it. I'm not going to tell you why. I mean, that would be setting him up for failure, maybe, right? Especially if you made us that way to be curious about stuff. That's not what he did. He told them specifically why. You can have every other tree that I've made for food for you, but not this one, and here's why. It's a tree that once you eat from, you're going to start realizing what's right and wrong on your own. And then you're going to make mistakes before you're ready. And you're not supposed to do that. In the image in which you're made, you're held accountable. So there was nothing else except that one thing in comparison to everything. Almost like you can't mess this up. It was almost impossible because the only thing you weren't supposed to do that told you what right and wrong was, as Jah then started to tell you more and more about it, and you wouldn't even known what right and wrong was unless he created something to tell you about it. Because you weren't doing it. No one was doing wrong. There was no wrong. There was a tree that if you ate from in defiance of Jah would be wrong. Tree of knowledge of good and bad. That's simple. Done. Right? You violate what Jah tells you to do and you knowingly do it without an inherited condition that makes you sort of handicapped. You're done. Right? Because there was no reason to do it. You chose to do it because of a desire on your own that Jah cannot accept or allow to go on. Or if he does, as in the case in which he did with us, it's a limited going on. It's you're going to die and we're going to make a means of survival for you later on, but this can't keep going on. Why can't it keep going on? Well, look at the earth today. There's a lot of great things, but you mean to tell me you can't see the bad things? You can't see why all these bad choices can't keep going on? I mean, we could almost destroy the whole planet. If he hadn't divided the languages at the Tower of Babel, we'd be at other planets by now and populate them probably. I mean, so my point is that Jah knows what's going on. And he told the first creation what was right and wrong. Do all of this and just don't do this. The whispering creature saw that, knew that, and thought about that, and then acted on it. And in doing so, as you're going to see, he became, as Jesus said, a manslayer. So this is the whispering creature's beginning. It's the start of his activity, not his creation necessarily. We don't have any evidence for that. And often the word beginning refers to things like the beginning of Jesus' ministry. That one was a manslayer when he began, right? So obviously he began his activity. If he was manslaying, it wasn't like created and then just immediately manslayed. So unless the creation of Satan was made in association with the creature of the land that reflected his image in ways that I can't get into. I'm more speculating, but we do have representations of serpents in the Bible, like in Numbers 21. We have serpents that were sent by Jah to punish the Israelites for their disobedience, and then a brass serpent that was coiled up around a pole that they had to look to be healed. These serpent figures and beings have been represented to us since the beginning. This beginning, other cultures' beginnings, and then even later on, right? Jesus said that once you have lifted up the Son of Man, just like the serpent was lifted up in the wilderness, he's from heaven. The heavenly beings are described as seraphim, fiery serpents. Whether or not that matches exactly what Jaho is and what all serpents or spirits, that is including the cherubim and others, I'm sure there are many, I can't say. What I can say is that the seraphim are, that means fiery serpents, fiery flying serpents, feathered serpent, plumed serpent. There's a lot of consistency with these beings and these accounts, and they're in different cultures far away from each other without the kind of communication we have today. I just don't think that could be coincidental, especially for a low-level creature like the serpent, as the article we read earlier said. So here we have this creature speaking to Eve, focused on the one thing that it would create an issue. And that's what he did. So what was his question? What did God say? You're not to eat from all the trees of the garden? See, that question's very interesting. And you have to watch out for it. There are a lot of people that are using the same trick, especially on you women. Why? Because it works. Why do you think the whispering creature chose it? You don't have to listen to me. Look at this account. Look at our history. Men have limitations too, and that's one of them at times. But in this case here, what is it highlighting? That beings can come to women like Eve and ask a question about something you already know, and then get you to doubt it. So let's see the doubt unfold. She confirms the truth of what is to be done and not done. And that's important, right? She's not ignorant. That's why the serpent had to get her to explain what she knew about it. He was trapping her. He was getting her to condemn herself if she then ate from it. Right? This wasn't something she had expressed before, obviously. She had heard it from Adam or from Jaho. Now the serpent wanted to hear her say it. She said it. We're not supposed to do this. We can do all that, just not this. Verse 4, Hebrew translation, then the whispering creature said to the woman, you will not be killed to the point of death. Verse 4, Greek translation, then the hissing creature said to the woman, you will not be killed by death. So, and killed to the point of death, that's consistent with what we read earlier about, the way that the Bible describes the punishment for eating from the tree of knowledge of good and bad, and that is to die in death, basically, or begin to die, expiring to the point of death, as we've discussed in prior shows. So we're going to get back to the day text reading in just a moment. Let me just take a quick look here. And let's see. Couple people here. we'll delete from the show because they're not commenting consistently with our material. We get a lot of Trinitarian apologetic nuts and people who are totally bankrupt in their spirituality. And what they do, because no one's listening to them anymore, they're done. They have to run around and find other people who are out preaching and teaching the historical truths of the Bible and talking about the God Jah and the one he sent forth, the Savior of the world, 1 John 4. They have nothing else to do, so they come and they bomb your live stream with things to create division among Christians, which tells you exactly who they are. And I know all you know this, but I just saw it in the chat. So I got rid of the apologetic nuts. We know what they do, and that's okay, because you can see what we do, right? Compare what we've been doing this morning with those two nuts, and now you have it, right? You can see who's doing what. All right, back to the show. So I just wanted to take care of that real quickly. It's all right. We're live here. We'll take everything. But we're focused on the material, and this is what I want you to do in real life. You see how quickly I dealt with them? Boom, boom. Back to the material. Back to the people who need your time. Verse 5, Hebrew translation. Because God is the one knowing that by the time you eat from it, then your eyes will have been opened, and you will become as God, or become as gods. And when you compare the next reading in the Greek. By knowing for yourselves what is good and what is bad. Verse 5, Greek translation. Indeed, this is the whispering creature, the hissing creature, responding to Eve, who just confirmed the truth about what Jah said. The whispering creature says God has realized, he already realized that in whichever day you might eat from the tree, in the middle of the enclosed garden or special place, then your eyes will be completely opened, and you will become as gods, since you will both know right and wrong. So what is he doing here? He's basically undermining her confidence in the prohibition. It's that simple, right? What you're not doing, that's actually good for you. And the person who's keeping you from that knows it. Because the second you do it, you're going to be just like that person. Now, at this point, the serpent was not known for anything but being the most thoughtful of the creatures on the earth to eat. So obviously, this being a spirit being, a son of God, he has either manifested as a serpent being, a whispering creature, a reptilian type being, or he is able to use one in the very same ways that all of these other ancient cultures tell us serpents were used or worshipped or viewed as real gods. And here you have that very same serpent talking about what? Being a god, being gods. So clearly this is not your average, this is a spirit being using or as a serpent-like reptilian being. And he says to undermine Eve's confidence in the prohibition that the very thing that you think is bad for you isn't bad for you. You won't die, and in fact, you'll become like the one who's keeping you from becoming like him. Now, women, when you hear that today, when you hear that men are keeping you from doing something, how does that make you feel? You're like, what? We're not equal? Of course, keep in mind that in the United States, I don't believe women are subject to the draft. Men are. So you're not equal in that respect. And so if you want to fight for equal rights in the United States, I'd like to see you fight for the right to be drafted. If you really feel that strongly about it. If you don't, then maybe you should think about it. Because I don't believe you can be drafted. We can. So you should think about the things that men have to do at times. They're not all that great. Why do you want to be a man? Well, so you can go and work and labor and do all these things, usually for other people or for people who don't always appreciate you. I guess if that's what you want. You're supposed to assist the man, and the man's supposed to love you, and you work together and you praise Jah. The serpent comes along, tells you you're missing out, gets you to leave the man to do what? Go become your own God. Do what you want to do. And since we already know that Jah says you're supposed to love each other, be with each other, and become one flesh, we know that not doing so is exactly what the devil says, right? You'll know for yourself what's right and wrong, and he's right. You're You do know, because deep down inside, we all know when we do something wrong. We can see, we've got eyes, we just hide it, or we lie to ourselves. We make ourselves delusional until reality sets in, right? And it's always worse for those who lie to themselves all the way to the end, right? You deal with life and you accept things and you try to do what's right or make things right, then you don't have such a bad day at the end. These people who are constantly lying to themselves, making these bad decisions, thinking they're gods, it's going to be a very bad end. And it's usually not a good way along the way either. But they lie to themselves in a way that makes them feel like it is. So you get caught in that equation. But not when you're just doing what Jah says. See, it's when we choose for our own. And we are susceptible. It's focused on Eve here, but anyone is really susceptible to this question, right? If you don't have faith in the prohibition, you don't understand what's right. Now, at this time, it would have been more difficult because Satan hadn't become known as this resistive creature. He was just proposing to Eve something she had accepted as not right. But she didn't have any reason to believe the serpent was right either. And the serpent didn't make her. The serpent didn't give her Adam. The serpent didn't create the special place. Because she knew that God had done these things. He's the one that told them all these things, not the serpent. So she had every reason to believe Jaho and or Adam. Right? He hadn't done anything wrong yet. He was there with her. And no reason to believe the serpent, even though he wasn't known as a resistor. Today we have a more difficult time, but we also know he's the resistor. So we're more limited, but we have more knowledge. What does the account say? We have more knowledge. Now we know. Now we know who he is, what he's doing, all the stuff. And we can choose to follow our own way, follow his way, follow someone else, or follow Jah. That's it. And then what Jesus and the angels that serve Jah do, they choose to follow him. And that's it. Now let's finish the account. All right, so the serpent says this. He undermines her faith in the prohibition. She doesn't know him as the resistor, but she has no reason to accept him over the others who gave her all these things. But now there's something else, and she's being deceived into believing that the people who are being good to her are holding out, basically, right? Are holding out this knowledge that she should have to be like them, the gods, or God. Verse 6, Hebrew translation. Then the woman started to see the tree is good for food, and it was pleasing to look upon. So desiring the tree as something beneficial, she began to pick from its fruit, and she began to eat, and to give it also to her man when he was with her. And he also began to eat. So obviously Adam knew what the fruit of the tree looked like, and he would have recognized it when she gave it to him. But she was already eating it. It's not like Eve waited for him, even. She reached out for what she saw as good. She thought it was good, and she was deceived into believing it was good. That's exactly what happens today. It's not like women are always being deceived into something evil. They're being deceived into something that looks good. It looks good to be out on your own and to be doing all these things and not really be supporting a man or pray. Just pursue the whole social life in ways that allow you to gain as much material and pleasure as you possibly can, so that when you die, you're done and you can give it to everybody else, right? That's essentially what they're doing, what everyone is focused on doing, and or their family and their community in different ways that may or may not be good. But ultimately, when it comes to the family unit, man and woman, it's what we're dealing with here, right? The relationship between God and man and woman and God, and other influences. When you are made to question what you believe to that point is correct, in a way that you won't really know unless you do it. I was talking to my son the other day. We were at we were going to go to a donut bar. And sometimes we'll get a donut like on our way in the gym. Because I believe if you're going to have like a sugary snack, I do it right before a workout. You can burn it real fast and you're not thinking about food and stuff. So, and then also if you take amino acids, The insulin response from the sugar can help. If you don't have a condition, I'm not giving dietary advice, just telling you how biochemistry works. You can better collect the amino acids post-workout, bioavailability. Separate subject, but we were talking about it, and I said, well, sometimes we get to this donut bar and they don't have the ones we want. And I said, well, what if I thought of something I could ask to make a point to him? And I said, what if we get there, because I knew he didn't like these type of donuts. I said, what if we get there and the only ones left are the coconut shredded covered jelly filled donuts? The kind I like coconut, like raw coconut, even coconut milk, but I don't like shredded coconut, and I don't like jelly filled donuts. Neither does he. So I said, what if that's the only one left? He said, I wouldn't get it. I said, well, what if the donut person said, well, how do you know you won't like it unless you try it? I wanted to hear what he said, because then I was thinking in like social life, what if someone offers him things like drugs or crime, and then he says no, and they say, well, how do you know it's not good unless you try it? That's often things criminals and low-level liars will do to try to deceive you. And I said, what would you do if she said that? And she said, well, how do you know you wouldn't like it if you didn't tried it? He thought about it for a second. He says, I would tell her no, because I don't want it. I said, good. You remember that, because it's going to come up again. And that's very important, because you might start to feel like appeasing the person who wants you to take something you don't like. And so you'll take it feeling more for their desire to have you select something they want. And it's really psychologically interesting, but we often get ourselves in a setting, or we can, where we're empathetic to the point where we'll do something we wouldn't otherwise do. Now here, it's not as obvious as that, but I'm using something that you would normally refuse, right? The coconut jelly. He still had a brief second, and he just had to really realize, no, I don't like that. I don't want it. Now, if it had been something a little more in between that he kind of liked, maybe he would have, even if he didn't want it. Okay, now we're getting closer to the fruit, because this was desirable to look upon. This would be like the one donut you go there to get, but that you're told not to take because it's not available, right? Maybe it's for a special charity or something like that. But I'm not going to go too far with the analogy. My point is, you can be made to choose something you otherwise wouldn't choose by someone's mere suggestion it might be good for you. How do you know you won't like it? Well, because I don't like shredded coconut and I don't like jelly. I'm pretty sure I won't like the two together. And I'm not willing to pay to try it. Okay, and I don't even want one for free because I don't want to waste the jelly if I don't like it. Sorry. No, thank you. No. That's the only way you can deal with it, right? Or you're going to find yourself with a mouthful of coconut and jelly. So Eve here is being presented with something that's really desirable. It's not a coconut jelly. The part that is difficult is she's been told not to eat something that's really desirable, looks good for food, and it looks just good, period. And now the whispering creature is telling me that it actually is good for me, that it's not bad, and it's not even going to kill me all the way to death. I guess it might hurt me a little bit, but it'll make me more like God. So what's wrong with that? I won't die. Looks good. And she did it. Then she gave it to her husband and he did it. Verse 7, Hebrew translation. Then the eyes of both the man and the woman. Well, you know what? I'm not sure if I ate verse 6. Read verse 6 Greek. Let me do that. So the woman saw the tree in the middle of the enclosed garden was right for food, and to the eyes it was nice to see. It is even beautiful when considered. Yeah, so we didn't read this verse. I'm glad I recognized that, because it's more expressive in those ways in terms of the appearance of the fruit. After taking some of the tree's fruit, the woman ate it. So she reached out and she ate it, the two things she wasn't supposed to do. Then she also gave some to her man when he was with her, and they both ate the tree's fruit. Okay, now let's wrap it up. Verse 7, Hebrew translation, last verse of our day text. After eating this fruit, both of them, then the eyes of both the man and the woman started to become open. And they knew they were naked. So they started sewing fig tree leaves together and to make clothes for themselves as cover. Verse 7, Greek translation, last text reading of our day text for today. Then the eyes of both were made completely open, and they realized they were naked. So they stitched fig tree leaves together and made clothes for themselves. All right. This is very important right here because, well, there are a couple of things. We've talked about in prior shows how Jesus spoke in the book of John about how those who were opposing him were claiming that they could see, that they weren't blind. And how Jesus then said that that made them accountable. Whereas if they were blind, they wouldn't be. Let's take a look at that account real briefly. Just a couple texts. Right here in John 9, and we'll just read 3 verses, 39 through 41. And Jesus said, "For this judgment I came into the world, that those not seeing might see, and those seeing might become blind." Verse 40, those of the Pharisees who were with him heard these things, and they said to him, "We are not blind also, are we?" Verse 41, Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would have no sin. But now you say we see, your sin remains." All right. Let me just do a quick apologetic nut check here. Okay, good. I had to do that because, as you know, our show, even though we include Trinitarians, we accept Trinitarians and other people who we believe at least want to promote the 3 things. They don't accept us if we don't accept the Trinity. So they'll come in times bomb the live stream with different comments that have nothing to do with what we're talking about. What we're talking about is right here in this account. And the very things that we're susceptible to, right? So Eve, she fell victim to what? To the suggestion that her confidence in the prohibition that was good for her was not good for her. She actually started to question something for no reason other than someone else's suggestive question that it was what she should do and that the other people or person was wrong, God and Adam. So that tells you right there, historically, women are viewed as susceptible to questions that undermine or get you to question prohibitions that are actually good for you. And I can think of a number of them, right? The prohibitions on certain levels of promiscuity obviously would lead to lesser transmitted diseases and abortions, right? That's just one example. So there are often prohibitions that are good for people, not just women, but men too. But we're talking about who's susceptible to what according to this account. According to this account, the woman was targeted by the whispering creature. And he targeted her on the one thing he knew God told her no about. And then he questioned her on that and told her that wasn't true and that it actually was good and that she'd find out. And then that's what she did. And then she took it to Adam. So what did Adam do? He could have told her, you shouldn't have done that. Now we have to go to Jaho and talk to him about it. And this encounter you had with the whispering creature. Or show me the whispering creature and I'll stomp on his head. Whatever the case. I don't know how it would have been worked out at that point. But my point is, she didn't do that. He didn't do that. He instead appears to have succumbed to her having done it and offering it to him. So we're susceptible, men. We're susceptible to women because we love them. They're beautiful. John made them that way. And so women are susceptible to people who make them think they can attain more in the wrong ways. It's not that women can't attain more. You don't think the woman would have continued to learn all the things that she was to learn from Jaho and Adam? Instead, she learned from the serpent. How good was that? Obviously not. Look at all the death that's resulted from it. And think of all the life that would be here now. So we know. But we're susceptible before we realize the result. We've got to think ahead. Sometimes it's not that easy. We've got to look at what's going on instead. And whereas Adam hadn't done anything wrong at that point, so Eve had no reason to blame him or anything. It's not like Satan went to her and said, hey, Adam, he doesn't really love you and all this stuff, which he can do today. He can get to us today because as men with sin, we do things in ways that can more easily, I think, be used to undermine the confidence of women who are supposed to help us, right? Well, help us with what? Just with work? What about spiritual stuff? You're not here to help us get through this life? We're not here to help you get through this life? Back then, they were supposed to help each other keep living. Instead, they caused each other to die. Well, what's going to be our history? Helping each other keep living or causing each other to die? It says after they ate of the fruit and did the thing they knew they weren't supposed to do, right? The one thing that would show that they knew they had done something wrong, right? Before that, without the tree, there's nothing else they were eating from at that time in ways that could have properly symbolized that, except maybe a boundary line, right? Don't go beyond this boundary. But the eating of the tree, that wouldn't have been something like aesthetically pleasing necessarily, whereas this and all the other fruits, so it showed comparatively appreciation for Jah and recognition of his authority to tell you what to do versus choosing it on your own. How else would you have known you were choosing it on your own without something like the tree there in the first place? Right? There would have had to have been something. Some other command about something before you knew what was right and wrong as you did things. And then we're told more about them. So the thing that was chosen to represent right and wrong is the tree. And in eating from it, they knew. How did they know? Because they were both told. They were both told not to do something that as they did, their spirit and body knew was wrong. And so the effect was sin. Right there, they started to die by death. Because they were doing what was wrong with the knowledge. Remember what Jesus said. If you were blind, you would have no sin. But now you say, we see. Your sin remains. They saw. They were not blind. See, blind to them would have been, eating from something else and no command being upon it. And it's still being wrong. Like maybe eating a poisonous plant. So Jah would have had to have healed them or done something. My point is, it wouldn't have been a sin because they weren't told not to eat it. So once they did the thing that showed they knew, if you say you see, your sin remains. If you are blind, you have no sin. They knowingly and with sight chose what was wrong. Their sin remained. And at that moment, they began to know right and wrong. It affected them, that knowledge, so that their vanity over their naked condition had to be covered up. What are we doing today? With few exceptions, right? And even then it leads in the terms of a naked society. It's more difficult because of our passion and our sex drive and our condition since the beginning that has become more aware, as you can see with all the pornography and things, of these different sexual activities. We're too sexual. It was the whole point involving circumcision, to make the people of Jaho less sexual because of the sensitivity involving the foreskin in ways that for men would create a greater sex drive. You still have the same testosterone, same genitalia basically, but the foreskin creates greater sensitivity in ways that I believe involves more desire for sex because of that. So Jaho knew how to limit that drive in ways that he could then continue to make the body of his son so that he could withstand the onslaught of the devil and the temptations of imperfect man. Much worse than having everything in the special place except one thing, and then being challenged by the whispering creature, not knowing who he is, but not being imperfect in sin. They had it much easier. All they had to do was listen to Jaho. That's all we have to do as well. It's just harder for us. And that's why we had Jesus come. Because we couldn't do it. We just couldn't climb out of that bad decision inheritance hole. The genetics of humans just kept getting worse and worse. Had the flood, had to reset everything, and then it regrows, and here we are. After what? 4,500, 5,000 years maybe since the flood. Probably 35 to 4,000 years is what I mean. Well, look at where we are now, and that was after the Tower of Babel. You had the flood, then the Tower of Babel, all these things keeping us from, extending our sin even further into space and throughout the planet. We're not ready yet. It has to be reset. So this is what happened. Men are susceptible to women. Women are susceptible to questions that are designed to undermine their faith in the things that are actually bad for them, so that you do them. And so one way you can be aware of this, both men and women, is just ask yourself, what's this going to do to me? Am I really missing out on something? What are other people like who are doing this? Is it just money? Because that comes and goes. And it's all going to go at the end of the day. That money, that car, that gold has no value where your spirit's going. It's not transferable. You can't take it with you. And that's why it's really just vanity. The very thing that made them make these clothes. What did Solomon say? Everything is vanity and a striving after the wind, like trying to hold oil into your hand while you walk around all day. You can't do it. Not and be effective in everything else, right? So what people are doing when they pursue vanity is they're limiting themselves, like holding oil in one hand. Because we're distracted too often by ourselves in ways we weren't meant to be. We're meant to focus on Jah, not ourselves. So they started to focus on themselves in the way that they saw each other, and their vanity made them cover over. Even that far back, that quickly. And here you have the origin of clothes. Of course, we'll read later in our day text coming up how Jaho helped them to make clothes even further, knowing now that they had brought on all this difficulty. Think of all the money and material we used to make clothes, things we were never meant to wear. Well, we have to now. I get that because of where we are. But back then, it was different. Back then, they didn't need clothes. And they wouldn't have even known they were naked if they had just waited for Jaho to tell them. And if Jaho ultimately told them, I want you to now start wearing clothes as humans become more popular, we don't know. All we know is he didn't make them that way, and that they chose that condition that remains to this day. This is not an ancient legend. We wear clothes. I mean, it's like one of our most compulsive things to obtain. Right? Food, clothing, and shelter. And yet, all these things were provided for us in better ways had we chosen the better course. So here we are today. We at least know, we understand why we are where we are, the foundation of where things went wrong, the involvement of the whispering creature, rebellious spirit son, whom Jesus said began to slay humans when he started his work, whereas Jesus came to save us, right, from the death that the manslayer had begun. But he lies to us. He's not coming to you as a man or woman slayer. He's not always coming to you as this red-skinned, horned, pitchfork creature. That's not it at all. What does the Bible say? An angel of light. Right? He's bright. This is the total opposite of what you might think, although it could include those things too in a negative way. People who resist Jah often devolve into this kind of macabre and grotesque form of life. Either way, he's an angel of light. And while he'll use light or darkness, you have to be prepared. We have to be sure that we're talking to the right people, and if we're not sure, that we at least take our time before we go too far. Before we give up on something that's actually much better than the alternative that these liars are presenting, right? Whether it's liars in the form of these Trinitarian apologetic nuts, or people who deny Jesus is coming in the flesh and they don't even care. They believe him as the plan of God, right? They deny the biblical texts that are explicit. Or if it's just people who don't believe and they're trying to lie to us to get us not to believe, or to commit fraud, or to harm other people for their own selfish pleasure, right? They're not doing it for you. Does it look like the whispering creature was doing what he was doing for Eve? Kind of sounds that way at first, right? Because you read the question he asked. Is it really so that you can't do this? And whenever people are asking like about what you can't do, it always kind of seems like they're concerned about you. You can't go. Oh, like they really want you to go, and they're bummed out that you're not. It kind of draws you into the emotional connection that they have to you going or you doing it. But you don't want to, nor is it probably good for you. But these wicked liars and people who want you to do things for them, they always make you think you're doing it for you. Buy this, you'll make a ton of money later on. Just keep buying it, don't worry, later on. See? It's always for them, maybe about you, but they don't just come to you and say, hey, I'm going to rip you off. Can I have your money? Obviously robbers aren't robbery, but most people who are like the whispering creature, they lie. They lie to you to try to get you to believe something that is not true. And if you don't have any good reasons to believe what they're saying is true, and in this day and age, even if you do, right? Even if someone's coming to you with evidence, someone you're with did something wrong in a way they want you to punish them or hold it against them, you better ask yourself, is that going to be good for you or for them? Right? Because everyone makes mistakes, but unless they're criminals, right? They're like trying to steal, lie, and cheat other people. They abuse their own children. Some of the worst people that we know. Unless they're like that, obviously we get away from those type of people. They're done. But other people are struggling. Everybody has difficulty. There's none. How could you possibly think that just because someone has done something as a mistake or an accident, even repeatedly because of sin, that you're then supposed to make it even more difficult on that person? Where does that fit in on any level with Christianity? Yet that's what we do to each other all the time. The apologetic nuts are the most famous ones, right? They come and burden everyone, just like the scribes and Pharisees, yet they don't lift a finger and go out and try to help the people who don't even believe. No, they're obsessed with spending time with us. And then we have other people who want us to spend time with them as they descend into immorality and pop their rear ends wide open the wrong ways, right? I mean, what is it they're really offering? It's always worse. It's always something comparatively worse when a liar is coming to you to deceive you, to get you to do something they want. They're not trying to get you to do something they want so that you become better. No, they're trying to get you to do something they want so you become even worse and they become better. That's it. And if you can't recognize that, if you don't see what's going on in these accounts, both in terms of the deception of Eve and the dumbness of Adam in doing something he knew was wrong just because he loved the woman. That love is strong. But if we don't resist it where it's wrong, then we're going to find ourselves in a bad situation, right? It's not easy because as men, we are made to love women. It's just how we are. It's the way Jaho made us all to be. But we have imperfect women that we're loving or attracted to. Women are attracted to imperfect men. So there's no way to get out of that, is what I'm saying. If you can't work within it, then it's best just to try to stay with yourself and try to be as accommodating to others as you can without getting intimate. Because this is who we are. This is what we have become. This is the account right here, telling you all about it. It tells you why men do dumb things for women. It tells you why women do dumb things when people who don't care about them suggest it. It tells you why we wear clothes and feel ashamed when we're naked and among others. And perhaps most important of all, it tells us, as part of the knowledge that we obtain through these acts, that the whispering creature is actually an enemy of Jaho. He's an enemy of humans, and he only really cares about himself. That's obvious from everything that has taken place. Maybe he cares about those who care about the things that he cares about too, in the same way that a wicked family member can gain the appeal or pity of other family members because of just being a family member, right? That pull is strong. That's why we have to use the knowledge we have of right and wrong. We have it. So we might as well use it and try our best to avoid people who are whispering to us in ways that they do to try to deceive us. And when people speak confidently and openly, and you can tell they're concerned about you and they want you to make the right decision, not just because of what they want, but because of what's actually good for you, that's someone you could talk to. You could probably learn a lot from someone like that. But from these people, from whispering creatures, from criminals, from liars, from people who abuse their own bodies for their own selfish pleasure, from people who kill their own unborn children, they're so irresponsible they can't have relations properly with other humans and then raise the life they created. They don't want any responsibility for it. They just kill it. Forget what the other man who helped create it says. Everyone will get what's coming to the decisions you make. So I highly recommend you do everything you can to use the knowledge we have, in spite of the condition we also have obtained. We have that, but we have the knowledge of good and bad. We can tell. For the most part, we can tell. And where we make mistakes and we were either dumb or we couldn't tell, let's just hope we're around people who are willing to be forgiving and loving instead of the ones who are going to make us feel even worse. And if that's the case, then we still have to do our best like Job, right? He didn't have someone there helping him. In fact, according to the account, it's not necessarily a man-woman thing. It's just, in his case, his wife was no help. We need help. But if we don't get it, we're still held accountable, whether man or woman, to do the very best we can with the knowledge that we have. And the best thing that we believe we can do is to praise the God Jah and to follow the one that he sent to us to show us how to do that same thing by listening to what he says, following the way we're made, not following this retarded society who doesn't even know who's male and female anymore. You see, they're gone or they're going. And the people who actually trust in the facts and what we can show is right versus wrong with the knowledge we have, we will live on. All these other people, they're going down the wrong path. And they know it. Remember what Jesus said? If you were blind, you'd have no sin. But now you see. So